Christ in every detail, the typological fulfillment. We have arrived at the summit of our three-part journey through Genesis chapter 22 verse 19. In our first study, we walked through the Hebrew grammar word by word, discovering the profound theology hidden in the original text, the resurrection silence around Isaac, the covenant meaning of Beersheba, and the invitation to settle in the promises of God. In our second study, we listened to the great voices of the ancient church, to Origen and Augustine and Chrysostom and Ambrose and Gregory Palamas, and then we turned inward to explore the psychological and healing dimensions of what this verse does for the wounded soul. Today we complete the journey. Today we climb to the highest vantage point that biblical study can offer, which is the view of the entire canon from the perspective of Jesus Christ. Today we are going to discover that Genesis chapter 22 verse 19 is not only a remarkable piece of ancient Hebrew narrative. It is a prophetic canvas on which the entire story of redemption is painted in advance. Every word in this verse, every name, every object, every movement points forward through the centuries to the cross of Calvary, to the empty tomb, to the gathering of the church, and to the final homecoming of all things in God. This is the third and final movement. Open every faculty of your spirit. We are going deeper than language and deeper than psychology. We are going into the mystery. Let us begin with the most striking fact about this verse, which we first noted in our opening study but which now, having built the full theological foundation, we can appreciate with its fullest force. Isaac disappears. After verse 13, where the ram is offered in his place, Isaac is not mentioned again in Genesis chapter 22. He does not return with Abraham. He does not arise with the servants. He does not walk to Beersheba. He vanishes from the text of Genesis chapter 22 as completely as though he had, in fact, been taken by the knife. In our first study, we noted that the writer of Hebrews in chapter 11 explicitly says that in the Akedah, Abraham received Isaac back from the dead in a parable, parabolically. The resurrection of Isaac is the paradigm, the parabolic sketch, the prophetic prototype of the resurrection of Christ. And the silence in Genesis chapter 22 verse 19 around Isaac is the narrative enactment of that parabolic death and resurrection. The verse does not mention Isaac because, for a moment, before he returns in chapter 24 to meet his bride, the narrative holds the silence of the tomb. Think about what this means for the full typological picture. Isaac is bound. Isaac is placed on the wood of the altar. In the consciousness of Abraham and in the structural theology of the text, Isaac is given over to death. The substitute ram is offered. And then Isaac disappears. He is not seen in the descent. He is not named in the return to Beersheba. His absence from verse 19 is the absence of the Son from the sight of the disciples between the burial and the resurrection. It is the silence of Holy Saturday. It is the 3 days in the heart of the earth. And then, just as the risen Christ appeared to his disciples on the first day of the new week, Isaac reappears in Genesis chapter 24, in the field at evening, at the threshold between the old day and the new, and he sees his bride coming and goes to meet her. The resurrection, the new creation, and the bridal union of Christ and the church, all three are encoded in the silence and return of Isaac across the chapters that frame Genesis chapter 22 verse 19. Now let us look at the young men who waited at the foot of the mountain. 2 unnamed servants. 2 who could not ascend. 2 who remained at the base while the sacrifice was transacted above. They are a type, a pattern, a prophetic figure that echoes forward through the canon in several extraordinary ways. On the morning of the resurrection, in the Gospel of John chapter 20, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb and finds it empty. She looks inside and she sees 2 angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. 2 figures waiting at the place of sacrifice. The two servants who waited at the foot of the mountain have, across the centuries of typological fulfillment, become the two angels at the empty tomb. Those who waited for the completion of the sacrifice are now the ones who announce its completion, who tell the weeping woman that the one she seeks is not here, that he has risen. And on the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24, two disciples are walking together, going from Jerusalem to a village called Emmaus. They are walking away from the place of sacrifice, just as the servants in Genesis chapter 22 waited while the sacrifice was transacted. They are joined by a stranger who opens the scriptures to them as they walk, and their hearts burn within them. And when they arrive at their destination and break bread together, their eyes are opened and they recognize the risen Lord. The two disciples on the Emmaus road are the typological fulfillment of the two servants who waited at the foot of the mountain and then arose, via Yakumo, and went together, Yachdav, to Beersheba. The rising of the servants, their going together, their arrival at the place of covenant, is the Emmaus road written 3,000 years in advance. The arrival at Beersheba, the well of the oath, is the breaking of the bread at the table in the village, where the covenant oath of the new creation is sealed in the recognition of the risen Christ. Va Yelchu Yachdav el Beersheba. And they went together to Beersheba. Let us look at this destination through the full lens of canonical theology. Beersheba means the well of the oath and the well of seven. In the covenant theology of the Old Testament, the oath of God is his absolute, irrevocable commitment of himself to his people. In Genesis chapter 22 verse 16, the angel of the Lord declares, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord." This is the highest form of divine oath, an oath sworn by God upon his own being, because there is nothing greater by which God could swear. In Hebrews chapter 6, the writer of the New Testament letter meditates on this very oath and says that in swearing by himself, God has provided two unchangeable things, his promise and his oath, in which it is impossible for God to lie, so that we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. The hope is described as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure, entering into the inner place behind the curtain. The well of the oath is therefore, typologically, the place of the absolutely guaranteed promise of God. And in the New Covenant, the place of the absolutely guaranteed promise of God is the church gathered around the Eucharistic table, where the words are spoken, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins." The Beersheba of the New Covenant is the Eucharistic community, the gathered assembly of those who drink from the well of the oath, the blood of the covenant, and who are sustained by the living water of the Spirit poured out in the church. In John chapter 4, Jesus sits at a well in Samaria and speaks to a woman about living water. He says, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The ancient wells of Beersheba, dug by Abraham in the desert, have been deepened by the word of Christ into an eternal spring. The well of the oath has become the well of the Spirit, the inexhaustible source of divine life that flows from the pierced side of Christ on the cross, water and blood, the water of baptism and the blood of the Eucharist, the two sacramental streams that constitute the life of the Church. The well of seven, Beersheba. 7. The number of the covenant oath, the number of completion, the number of the days of creation and the day of divine rest. In Revelation chapter 5, the risen and exalted Christ is described as the Lamb standing as though slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. The Lamb, who is the fulfillment of every Old Testament sacrifice, including the ram on Moriah, is the Lamb of the 7, the fullness of the Spirit and the completeness of the covenant. The well of 7 in the desert of Canaan has become, in the typological fullness of the new covenant, the Lamb with the 7 spirits, the source of the 7-fold gifts of the Spirit poured out upon the church. Now let us look at the tamarisk tree that Abraham had planted at Beersheba in Genesis chapter 21 verse 33, and to which he returned after the Akedah. The tree is the Ishal, Tamarux aphylla, planted by Abraham's own hands in the soil of the covenant land and associated with his calling on the name of El Olam, the God of the ages. The tree is a living monument of the covenant. It is a growing, breathing, moisture-collecting sign of faith planted in the soil of the promise. The wood of the cross of Christ is the typological fulfillment of every wood in the Akedah narrative. There is the wood that Isaac carried up the mountain on his own back, the bundle of firewood for the altar, which is an exact image of Christ carrying his own cross to Golgotha. There is the wood of the altar on which Isaac was bound. And there is the wood of the tamarisk tree planted at Beersheba, the living wood of the covenant, the tree of life in the desert of the promise. The cross of Christ is all of these at once. It is the wood of sacrifice. It is the altar of the offering. And it is the living tree planted in the soil of the new covenant, the tree of life whose leaves are for the healing of the nations, as Revelation chapter 22 declares. The tamarisk tree, we noted in our first study, collects moisture from the air at night and creates a zone of cooled, moistened air beneath its canopy. In the burning heat of the Negev, it is a place of relief, a microclimate of life in the landscape of death. This is an exact natural parable of the cross. The cross of Christ creates, in the burning heat of a world under the curse of sin and death, a zone of mercy, a canopy of grace, a microclimate of healing and life. Those who come under the cross find relief. Those who rest beneath the tree of life find the air breathable and the ground coolable. The Ishal of Beersheba becomes the cross of Calvary, and the cross becomes the tree of life in the garden of the new creation. And now let us look at who settles under the shade of this tree in the fulfillment. Va Yeshiv Avraham Biv Beersheba. Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. In the new covenant, the church is the Beersheba. The church is the place of the oath, the place of the living water, the place of the tree of life, the place of the covenant community gathered around the provision of God. And those who dwell in the church, who settle into her sacramental and communal life, are doing what Abraham did when he settled in Beersheba. They are choosing to make their permanent home in the place of the oath of God. They are choosing to put their roots down in the soil of the covenant. They are choosing to live under the canopy of the cross and drink from the well of the Spirit. The Marian dimension of this typological picture is profound and tender. Mary, the mother of the incarnate Son, stands at the intersection of every thread of this story. She is the young woman who received the announcement of the divine promise, just as Abraham received it. She is the woman who said yes to the sacrifice, just as Abraham said yes, thy will be done, fiat, let it be done to me according to your word. She is the woman who stood at the foot of the cross, just as the servant stood at the foot of the mountain, watching from below while the sacrifice was transacted above. And she is the woman who waited in the upper room, with the community of disciples, in the silence between the cross and Pentecost, in the Holy Saturday of the churches waiting for the Spirit. When the Spirit came, Mary was there. Acts chapter 1 verse 14 tells us that the disciples devoted themselves to prayer together with the women and Mary the mother of Jesus. She was at Beersheba. She was at the well of the oath when the Spirit, like the living water of the covenant, burst open upon the gathered community and the church was born. The tamarisk tree of Abraham became the fiery tongues of Pentecost. The well of the oath became the outpouring of the Spirit upon all flesh. And Mary, who had waited faithfully at every threshold, from the Annunciation to the cross to the tomb to the upper room, was there to receive the fullness of what had been promised. We have now walked through every layer of this remarkable verse. We have been in the Hebrew grammar and in the Greek nuances of the Septuagint. We have sat with Origen and Augustine and Chrysostom and Ambrose and Gregory Palamas. We have felt the trauma of the 3-day journey and the neurobiological reality of the rescue and the healing of the return. We have traced every detail of this verse through the typological canon and found Jesus Christ at every point. The silent Isaac is the buried and risen son. The two servants are the angels at the empty tomb and the disciples on the Emmaus road. The journey together is the road of the resurrection community. The well of the oath is the Eucharistic table and the Pentecostal outpouring of the Spirit. The tamarisk tree is the cross. And the dwelling in Beersheba is the life of the church, the settled, rooted, covenant-anchored life of those who have been through their Mount Moriah and have come home to the promise of God. And now this word is addressed, finally and completely, to you. Not as theology alone. As encounter. As invitation. As the living, active, sharper than any two-edged sword word of God reaching into the joints and marrow of your actual life. You have been through something. Or you are in the middle of it right now. The knife was raised. The wood was heavy. The desert was hot and the water skins were running low. Maybe you are still on the mountain. Maybe you are in the descent. Maybe you are somewhere on the road between the mountain and Beersheba, between the fire and the home, between the ordeal and the settlement. Hear this. The God who stopped the knife is the Father of Jesus Christ. The provision that appeared in the thicket was the Ram of God, the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. And the Lamb has already been slain. The provision has already been made. On the cross of Calvary, on the altar of infinite love, the Father gave the Son gave Himself, and the Spirit sealed the covenant in blood and water and the eternal oath of God upon God's own being. It is finished. The sacrifice is complete. The resurrection has happened. The Spirit has been poured out. The well of the oath is open, and the living water is available to every thirsty soul who turns from their mountain and comes home to the covenant. Your calling is the calling of Abraham in verse 19. Turn. Return. Arise with your community. Go together to the place of the oath. And settle there. Not in passive resignation but in the active, powerful, rooted peace of one who has been through the fire and found it did not destroy them, who has been through the death and found it did not have the last word, who has been through the silence and found that the silence was not absence but the held breath before the resurrection dawn. Settle into the love of God. Settle into the promises that cannot be moved. Settle into the community of the new covenant, the church gathered around the cross and the table and the living water of the Spirit. You are not meant to be a perpetual wanderer. You are meant to be a dweller, a settler, a person of covenantal rootedness, from whom, as from Abraham in Beersheba, the blessing of God flows out to all the families of the earth. Receive these final affirmations. Speak them with your whole heart. I am the seed of Abraham by faith in Jesus Christ. Every promise made to him is confirmed to me in the blood of the cross and the power of the resurrection. I dwell in the well of the oath. The covenant of God over my life is as sure as the oath God swore by His own name. Nothing in heaven or earth or hell can break what God has sealed. I am on the Emmaus road with the risen Christ. My heart is burning. The scriptures are being opened. The bread will be broken. I will recognize my Lord. I am planted like the tamarisk tree. My roots go down into the soil of the covenant. I provide shade and moisture and life for those around me. God is growing me in the desert into a source of life for others. The silence I have been sitting in is not abandonment. It is the silence before the resurrection. My Isaac is coming back. My promise is not dead. The dawn is breaking. This is the word of the Lord for your life today. This is the full depth of Genesis chapter 22 verse 19, from the first Hebrew verb to the final parabolic fulfillment in Jesus Christ. 3,000 years of revelation converging on a single, quiet, extraordinary verse. Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. return, arise, go together, dwell. That is the word. That is the invitation. That is the life. If this three-part journey through Genesis chapter 22 verse 19 has brought you into encounter with the living God, if it has opened healing in wounded places, if it has shed light on a dark season, we want to hear your story. Write to us at christ4life143@gmail.com. Every message is read. Every prayer request is carried before the Lord. Please take a moment to like all 3 videos in this series and share them with someone who needs to hear that the God who provides is waiting for them at the bottom of their mountain. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a single step of our verse-by-verse journey through the Word of God. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse.